Friends, we are witnessing a structural fracture in the European Union that goes far beyond standard political rhetoric. This is not a diplomatic spat. This is a procedural attempt to decapitate the current leadership of the European Commission. The catalyst was immediate. Following a drone incident in Polish airspace, a moment that required precise de-escalation and forensic analysis, the response from Brussels was diametrically opposed to the requirements of stability. Viktor Orban, Prime Minister of Hungary, has formally demanded the resignation of Ursula von der Leyen. The data driving this decision is stark. In her latest address, the Commission President mentioned Ukraine 35 times. The word peace was effectively absent. This is not just a semantic imbalance. It is a declaration of intent. The mechanism of control has shifted from consensus building to direct financial coercion. Orban revealed that explicit threats were made. Any member state refusing to align with the new militarized line of Brussels will face immediate cuts to EU funding. This is the weaponization of the budget against sovereign policy. The reaction was swift. The Patriots for Europe faction has initiated a formal vote of no confidence. The machinery of the EU is grinding against its own gears. We need to understand the mechanics of this misstep because it reveals a fundamental error in how the current Commission views its mandate. The European Union was designed as an economic engine, a system of trade and regulatory alignment meant to ensure prosperity and prevent conflict through interdependence. However, under the current leadership, the Commission has pivoted toward becoming a geopolitical actor without the mandate or the military infrastructure to support such a role. When a drone breaches the airspace of a NATO and EU member like Poland, the systemic response should be a rigorous investigation and a bolstering of defensive protocols. Instead, the incident was utilized as political leverage to double down on a war narrative. By focusing the entirety of the Union's political capital on the conflict in Ukraine, to the point of threatening the fiscal stability of member states who disagree, von der Leyen has introduced a solvency risk into the political cohesion of the bloc. You cannot run a trade union like a military alliance when half your members are facing recessionary pressures and energy deficits. The threat to cut funding is the critical error here. It transforms the EU from a cooperative club into a coercive hierarchy. This destroys the trust required for the single market to function. If budget allocations are no longer based on economic metrics, but on ideological compliance, the financial rating of the entire bloc comes into question. Let's dive deep into the operational reality of this conflict. This is about more than just one speech. It is about the instrumentalization of the EU institutions. The Patriots for Europe faction, a relatively new consolidation of right-wing and conservative forces, is using this moment to test the legal frameworks of the parliament. A vote of no confidence is the nuclear option in parliamentary procedure. While the arithmetic to pass such a vote is difficult to achieve given the current coalition dominance of the EPP and Socialists, the mere initiation of the process signals a loss of legitimacy. It forces a debate on the floor where the Commission's record will be dissected. Orban's argument rests on the specific metrics of the speech. 35 mentions of a non-EU state, accompanied by threats against actual contributors to the EU budget. This highlights a distortion in priorities. The European economy is currently suffering from a loss of industrial competitiveness, high energy costs, and a lagging tech sector compared to the US and China. Yet, the executive focus is almost entirely external. By tying internal funding to external foreign policy alignment, the Commission is effectively creating a sanction regime within its own borders. This is a high-risk strategy. It assumes that countries like Hungary, Slovakia, or even potentially Austria and others will fold under financial pressure. But history shows that when sovereignty is threatened by central bureaucracy, the result is often entrenchment, not compliance. Furthermore, we must look at the ripple effects of this militarized stance. The war economy, rhetoric coming out of Brussels, has tangible costs. It mandates shifts in industrial production, justifies energy inflation as a price of security, and redirects infrastructure funds toward logistics corridors meant for military mobility rather than civilian trade. When Orban says, "Change is coming whether we like it or not," he is referring to the disconnect between this top-down policy and the ground-level reality of European voters. The recent elections showed a massive surge for parties that prioritize national economic interest over continental geopolitical ambition. The Commission's refusal to pivot back to economic fundamentals is widening the gap between Brussels and the capitals. The drone incident in Poland was a stress test. A fragile system reacts to stress with rigidity and threats. A robust system reacts with adaptability and investigation. The response from von der Leyen, a speech focused on escalation and financial punishment, demonstrates rigidity. This suggests the system is brittle. If the only tool left to enforce unity is the threat of bankruptcy for member states, then the unity is already gone. We are watching the Patriots for Europe faction attempt to leverage this brittleness. By calling for a vote of no confidence, they are forcing every MEP to go on record. Do they support the continued militarization of the bloc at the expense of national sovereignty? Or do they support a return to the original mandate of peace and prosperity? This vote will likely fail in terms of raw numbers today, but it sets the battlefield for the next budget cycle. The EU acts on 7-year budget cycles. If the Commission persists in using the conditionality mechanism to withhold funds based on political disagreements, we will see a paralysis of the budget. A paralyzed budget means no funds for the green transition, no funds for digitalization, and no funds for agricultural subsidies. The entire technocratic machine halts. This is the leverage Orban holds. He knows that while Brussels can threaten to withhold money, the Commission also needs unanimous consent for major financial decisions. It is a game of chicken played with the continent's credit card. The specific mention of the drone incident in Poland as a justification for peace, rather than war, flips the narrative. Orban's framing is that the proximity of the war is a danger that requires distance, not engagement. Brussels' framing is that proximity requires total mobilization. These are two irreconcilable worldviews sharing a single bank account. The threats to cut financing are the final straw in a long deterioration of diplomatic protocol. In the past, disputes were settled behind closed doors in the European Council. Now, they are fought with public ultimatums. This degradation of diplomatic channels is a leading indicator of institutional decay. When the Prime Minister of a member state publicly calls for the head of the executive branch, the pretense of a happy family is over. The Patriots faction is no longer a fringe group. They are the second or third largest force, depending on the specific alignment, representing millions of voters who feel the economic pain of the current strategy. Consider the energy dimension. The militarist policy advocated by the Commission relies on the assumption that Europe can absorb higher energy costs indefinitely to maintain sanctions and decouple from Eastern resources. However, the industrial data contradicts this. German deindustrialization is a fact, not a theory. Manufacturing is fleeing to the US or China. By doubling down on the very policies that accelerated this trend, von der Leyen is alienating the industrial base of the core nations. Orban's critique serves as a proxy for this wider industrial discontent. It's not just about Hungary. It's about the viability of European manufacturing under a war economy regime. The threat to cut funds is an attempt to silence this economic reality check. But you cannot silence a trade deficit. You cannot silence a bankrupt factory. The numbers will eventually override the rhetoric. The verdict is clear. The European Commission has overextended its mandate. By transitioning from a regulatory body to a geopolitical command center, it has exposed itself to political attacks it was never designed to withstand. Ursula von der Leyen's position is becoming untenable not necessarily because of the vote of no confidence, which she may survive procedurally, but because she has lost the ability to generate consensus. A Commission president who must rule by threat of financial starvation is a president who has already lost control of the room. The Patriots for Europe maneuver is a signal flare. It indicates that the opposition has organized, they have the procedural knowledge to disrupt operations, and they are willing to target the leadership directly. The drone in Poland was the spark, but the fuel was years of economic mismanagement and overreach. Change is coming, as Orban stated. That change will either be a democratic correction through the institutions or a disorderly fragmentation of the Union's single market. The current trajectory, threats, militarism, and debt, is mathematically impossible to sustain. The only question remaining is how expensive the correction will be.